Finally, Hannity comes clean. Seeing a man who has made a living on hard facts and heated arguments suddenly reveal something very personal is disconcerting. Recently, one of America's most well-known conservative media speakers, Hannity, did just that. After years of political discourse, primetime television, and high-profile interviews, Hannity finally relaxed at age 63 to discuss a topic far more relatable than power or policy: love. Fans weren't the only ones who were taken aback by his tearful admission about the woman he refers to as the love of his life. They believed they already knew the man, but it softened the harsh edges. However, did they actually? I worked for many years as a busboy, waiter, dishwasher, cook, and, I guess, bartender. I worked as a painting contractor back then. I put up wallpaper. Houses were framed by me. I worked in construction. All day long I listened to talk radio. And I'll be in Santa Barbara, California one day. I also learned that Sean Patrick Hannity, who was born in Queens, New York, in 1961, attends the local college, the youngest in a close-knit Irish-American family of 4 children. His mother, Lillian, was a correctional officer at a county jail, and his father, Hugh, was a court official. Although it wasn't a luxurious lifestyle, it was based on community and discipline. Sean had a stubborn streak, according to many who knew him as a youngster. This kind of perseverance can either drive parents crazy or pave the way for success in the future. He was just another neighborhood kid growing up in Franklin Square, Long Island, doing odd jobs, mowing lawns, and tinkering with anything he could get his hands on. However, his attention was initially drawn to the sound of the radio. Hannity would listen to talk radio late at night, when most children were asleep. I was fascinated by how a speaker's voice might start a national dialogue. Hannity realized he didn't want a typical 9-to-5 job by the time he was in his early 20s. He experimented with a variety of occupations, including bartending, painting, and construction. But the thought of a crowd and a microphone kept coming back to him. When he got a volunteer position at a California college radio station, it was his first big break. Sean saw it as everything, despite its modest size, lack of polish, and lack of compensation. Hannity eventually had shows in Alabama and Georgia after expanding to larger markets from that little California station. Producers noticed his unwavering determination and recognized his potential outside of radio. The moment was ideal. A new era of political talk programs becoming cultural forces was dawning in America. Additionally, Hannity's audacious approach was precisely what the networks were seeking. His life abruptly changed by 1996. He was chosen to co-host a new show with liberal critic Alan Colmes by Fox News, an aspirational upstart network at the time. Hannity and Colmes was an immediate hit. Hannity relied on the tension created by the nightly collision of two philosophies, which attracted viewers. He demanded to be heard, not merely debate. His voice was among the most well-known in America when the Hannity Show debuted as a solo program years later. He critiqued policy, conducted presidential interviews, and occasionally stirred up trouble. But one thing remained the same throughout: his vitality. But Hannity was quieter behind the camera. Off-air, friends and coworkers frequently characterize him as unusually reserved, valuing faith, loyalty, and privacy. The broadcaster was the character that America watched each night. The man off-screen, however, was really thoughtful. He would frequently talk about his family, his beliefs, and the small things from his early years that he still missed, including Sunday dinners, his parents' voices, and the honesty that only comes from coming from a lowly background. It was evident to everyone who knew Sean Hannity that although he can flourish in a chaotic work environment, his true desire was for tranquility in his personal life. At that point, his story takes a surprising turn. I firmly believe that I am powerless on my own. Everything in this world, in my opinion, is a gift from God. Sean Hannity was just a young radio presenter, trying to make it before he became famous and started Fox News. He also met the woman who would play a significant role in his life story during those formative years, Jill. In Huntsville, Alabama, Jill worked as a journalist for a local newspaper. Hannity would call her up for story tips when she first heard his voice on the radio. And soon those business calls became personal ones. Both of them were eager to leave their mark, youthful and ambitious. A spark appeared, and it soon developed into something more. Their marriage took place in 1993. The ceremony wasn't very elaborate. It was straightforward, sincere, and brimming with the hope of two individuals prepared to take on the world together. Hannity frequently attributed his ability to stay grounded and keep his temper in check to Jill. Their family expanded along with his work. In 1998, they became parents to their first child, a son called Patrick. Mary Kelly, their daughter, was born 3 years later. A different side of Hannity was frequently seen by people who knew him during those years. The dad who attended tennis matches. The husband who, despite his hectic schedule, made sure his family remained near. However, there is always a price for being in the spotlight. As Hannity's career took off, the grueling hours, the frequent travel, and the scrutiny of celebrity started to wear them down. Silently, his marriage began to deteriorate. He never discussed it in public. Insiders close to the couple said that years of living under scrutiny gradually created an imperceptible wall between them. But he never does. Sean and Jill made the decision to split up in 2019, after more than 20 years of dating. Without the drama or scandal that typically accompany celebrity splits, the divorce was quietly settled. There were no sour remarks or revealing interviews. It was just the decision of two individuals who had lived together to part ways. However, upon closer inspection, that silence revealed a great deal. It demonstrated respect for their kids as well as for one another. Hannity and Rhodes maintained their co-parenting skills with amazing grace even after their split. According to acquaintances, Hannity remained very involved in their lives, and their children continued to be their major priority. Patrick's father was always there, particularly when he was playing tennis at Wake Forest University. Hannity, on the other hand, was Mary's encouraging father, who always found time for her academic and athletic endeavors. On the inside, though, Sean found that time challenging. He was a man accustomed to dominating discussions, stories, and public opinion. However, grief cannot be argued away, and love is beyond your power. During that period, many who worked with him observed a slight change. The man who had earlier given certainty to every quiet slowed down his speech and deepened his thoughts. Leaning on his faith in the quiet nooks of his own life, he began to spend more time reflecting. According to his friends, he became more private than ever before, not withdrawn, but protective. He completely stopped discussing relationships and refrained from answering even trivial queries about dating while on the air. It appeared to many that Sean Hannity had made the decision that love was no longer for him. But something else was going on underneath that protective facade, a patient, silent rediscovery of what a second chance at love could look like. He had experienced the highs and lows of achievement, the pain of heartbreak, and the ascent and descent of celebrity. He had developed a career that required all of his focus, and had discovered that life is more complicated than a broadcast schedule. It therefore struck a different chord when, years later, he talked about meeting the love of his life at the age of 63. Sean Hannity is conservative, that's for sure. This isn't a fake place. Ted Capel is not me. I'm a human. The show is labeled as conservative. I firmly believe that I am powerless on my own. Everything in this world, in my opinion, is a gift. Sean Hannity didn't make any significant pronouncements or public remarks following the dissolution of his marriage. He just continued to turn up, as he usually had. Millions watched his incisive political analysis and unapologetic remarks every night. Off camera, however, his world had become silent. He began to value moments over milestones, according to those who knew him well. He made time for his children's interests, reunited with old friends, and even took up pastimes unrelated to politics or television. That was a big change for a man whose life was all about deadlines. However, Hannity's career never slowed down. His program was one of the most listened to in America, and it remained dominant. His television program continued to dominate the ratings every night, but there seemed to be something odd about him. The smoldering tone persisted, but beneath it was a man developing equilibrium. In a casual comment, he once alluded to having discovered the value of thankfulness, the silent appreciation of what really counts: peace, family, faith, and health. He didn't seem to be interested in seeking approval anymore. That was a huge discovery for someone who had been in the American media storm for decades. Hannity established a pattern based on consistency throughout those peaceful years. Getting up early, working out, praying, and then going right to work. According to colleagues, he developed a discipline that was almost monastic. He didn't go to prestigious parties, date in public, or feed the gossip mill. He was very protective of his solitude, yet beyond that orderly facade, there was still a desire for companionship, the kind that makes you feel noticed when the cameras are not rolling, rather than necessarily for romance. After all, loneliness affects everyone, regardless of accomplishment. It was also going to be difficult for Hannity to let someone back in, since he had constructed a stronghold around his private life. The next part of his story was already waiting in the same building, but he was unaware of it. Someone who had experienced love, grief, and resiliency on her own path. You ultimately got divorced, but you remained steadfast in your religion. Yes, that was a really trying time in my life, but we get along well and do a great job co-parenting. I've been employed at Fox News for 14 years, and my name is Annesley Hayhart. Annesley Hart was more than just a TV personality. She had established herself in the competitive field of broadcast journalism. Annesley, a native of South Carolina, rose through the ranks to become one of Fox's most adored morning anchors by bringing a sense of grace and optimism to her work. But beneath that radiant smile and serene poise was a woman who had experienced her fair share of heartache. Having experienced 2 failed marriages, she was parenting her small daughter, Hayden, alone. She had turned her faith into a compass that helped her navigate the ups and downs of life. The trajectories of Sean and Annesley were similar in many respects. They were both network veterans. Both were learning what it meant to reconstruct their personal lives after loss, and they had both survived public scrutiny. Their bond served as the foundation for their early chemistry. They had met at the Fox studios and had been working together for years. However, something changed in the process. Once work-related conversations started to feel more intimate. Hensley respected Sean's beliefs, his commitment to his kids, and his discipline. Sean was impressed by her kindness, strength, and unflinching optimism. Respect was reciprocated. Soon after, coworkers started to take notice. They frequently went in the same circles and occasionally showed up together at events. However, Hannity and Hayhart stayed silent even as rumors started to circulate. They chose to keep their connection out of the public eye and never acknowledged or denied anything. Sean did that on purpose. He didn't want to let the world inside his heart again after enduring the scrutiny of a public marriage. However, those close to him observed that he appeared different when Annesley was present. He continued to laugh. He weighed less. She displayed a tenderness that wasn't often seen on screen. Their closeness, faith, family, and conviction that everything in life happens in its own time were all built on their shared beliefs. They started going to church together. It was genuine, but there was no glitzy romance, no magazine covers, and no red carpets. They developed a bond based on comprehension rather than show. On broadcast, he would commend her observations and entice listeners to pay attention. In private, he would express his admiration for her perspective and how she maintained her kindness in a society that encourages conflict. It was the alignment of similarities more than the attraction of opposites that brought them together. Both of them had private hearts despite being well known. In a field where appearances are everything, they are both looking for something real. Despite being quiet, their connection started to develop into something more, and everyone who saw them together could sense it, even if neither of them felt the need to openly label it. This relationship was therapeutic for Hannity, who had repressed his feelings for years. It served as a reminder to Annesley that love can still find you in the most unexpected ways, even after heartbreak. Then came the turning point in the story. The admission that would garner media attention and serve as a reminder to all that love can inspire bravery in even the most reticent hearts. Hayhart, Annesley. You were at the Kong with us, I believe. To begin with, congrats on the book. Many thanks. It wasn't during a pre-planned interview or political broadcast. It wasn't raucous or theatrical. It was easy. The kind of thing that comes as a surprise and stays with you. The normally confident and calm Sean Hannity was speaking softer than usual. The booming certainty of a man defending his convictions was not in his tone. It was the tactful candor of someone disclosing something he had long suppressed. He started off by discussing thankfulness and the people that support you through difficult times. Then, almost naturally, he became personal in his remarks. He talked about meeting the love of his life, someone who had been there for him through the good times and the bad. The typically angry host briefly appeared human, not the media titan or political analyst, but a 63-year-old guy who recognized the value of second chances. Not that they didn't believe Hannity was a person with feelings. It was because they had never witnessed him so candidly divulge them. He had never talked about relationships or family, and he had always kept that aspect of himself hidden. He omitted names. He didn't have to. Those who had followed his path were fully aware of the person he was referring to. The compassion of his words, the timing, everything was pointing at Annesley, and the impact of the occasion was not solely due to the words. It was his genuineness, his pauses, and the faint smile that appeared on his face when he remarked, "I'm just thankful at this point in my life." That sentence alone represented a turning point. I found someone who makes me better every single day. Not only in the public's perception of Sean Hannity, but also in his own. The man who used to hide behind his employment was no more. Someone who had lived long enough to understand that vulnerability is the source of true strength took his place. It is evident that Sean Hannity has entered a new phase of life at the age of 63. It turns out that his most significant epiphany wasn't at all political, for a man who has debated the status of the country for decades. It was intimate. It was about understanding that the best things in life can happen in private, away from the spotlight, and that love doesn't have a time limit or care about what other people think. By the way, I wanted to say how much I appreciate you all inviting Lilmi to join your fantastic Bible study. I mean, I could always pray more. We all reside in the best nation that God has ever given us. Sean Hannity's admission caused a stir that extended well beyond his typical audience. Those who had been watching him for years were taken by surprise. There was only honesty, no pretense or statement worthy of a headline. That kind of sensitivity was uncommon from a man who had made his profession out of being unbreakable. The media community responded swiftly. It was surprising to some, refreshing to others, and humanizing to many fans, making him more approachable. His integrity didn't harm his reputation in the workplace. It made it deeper. The incident served as a reminder that vulnerability is not the same as weakness in a time when authenticity is scarce. Many of his devoted followers felt even closer to him as a result. Additionally, it appeared to be a turning moment in Sean's life. He started to lose the guardedness that had once characterized him. He wasn't an open book overnight. There was a discernible warmth and a sense of peace that comes from realizing that love was no longer something to conceal. Even though he is still a quiet person by nature, he wasn't trying to reinvent himself at 63. He was accepting life as it is, one that is full of thankfulness, friendship, and the quiet assurance that comes from being cherished for who you are, rather than what you do. Perhaps the most profound aspect of his confession was that it was more than a personal epiphany. It served as a reminder that people who appear to be bigger than life are still looking for timeless love, acceptance, connection, and basic truths. The tale of Sean Hannity goes beyond simply finding love again as an elderly person. It all comes down to having the guts to start over. His story's first lesson is that happiness can be found at any time. At 63, Hannity made her confession, at which point many individuals believe their narrative has already been written. However, his path demonstrates that joy may emerge long after the storm has passed, that love has no expiration date, and that life never ceases to surprise us. In the second lesson, vulnerability is discussed. Hannity's candor demonstrated that, in a society where stoicism is frequently associated with strength, real strength can occasionally be found in lowering one's defenses. He maintained his authority by expressing his emotions. He developed depth. Millions were reminded by him that being emotional does not negate toughness. It intensifies it. And then there's the gratitude lesson. Hannity did not present his romance as a triumphant tale. He presented it as a boon. He spoke as though he had discovered the hard way that having no one to share your success with makes it meaningless. His confession was poignant because of that feeling of gratitude following what he had experienced. And this is possibly the most significant lesson learned. Individuals evolve. The man in front of the cameras today is not the same Sean Hannity that the world witnessed 20 years ago. He used to be ferocious and restless, but now he is thoughtful and grateful. Hannity's confession made it very evident that the human heart never truly rests. It continues to hunt and hope, and occasionally, when the time is right, it discovers what it has been seeking all along: love.